Your hosts, Kyle and Chris.
Bonjour, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of the Two Tongues Podcast. For this morning, we're doing a little ditty called Ex Nihilo, Latin phrase meaning from nothing, often associated with religious stories about the creation of the cosmos. How did God create the cosmos? Ex nihilo, from nothing. In the beginning, right? So this is what we're going to talk about today, and it's related to a couple of episodes I did previously. So if any of this sounds familiar, that's probably why. I did an episode called Nothing Matters with Michio Kaku. And then I did an episode follow-up to that later on called Nothing Matters with Alan Watts. So we were looking at a kind of a physicist perspective side by side with a psychonaut, philosopher, poet's perspective about this idea of nothingness and kind of getting into the mystery of what nothing is. The Taoists have a great way of talking about the value of nothingness, like the value of a window isn't in the structure of the window. It's not in the thing, right? It's in the absence of a wall that the window allows. It is in the emptiness, the nothingness is what makes the window valuable. The same explanation for a cup or a bowl, right? It's the vessel is useful because of its hollowness, because of the nothingness in the bowl, right? So the Taoists have an interesting way of talking about it, and it kind of gets the juices flowing as to what I'm going to be talking about today as it pertains to nothing. We're going to be talking about nothing today. Much ado about nothing. So what I want to do here, interestingly, is I don't know. I want to use a little bit of a taste of my childhood to set the stage here. I was a young kid when a film came out. Well, no, I watched it as a young kid. It came out actually the year I was born, I want to say. A little ditty called The Never-Ending Story, a fantasy film based on a book, a 1979 novel by a guy named Michael Ende. And it's terrific. If it was a part of your childhood, then you were very lucky. It made quite the impression on me, The Never-Ending Story. And the idea here is, if you remember, that the villain of The Never-Ending Story is something called the Nothing. So this is how it ties together. What I want to do here is I want to give you a little bit of the back and forth of the main characters from the Never-Ending Story. When they first are introduced to each other, they're all sitting around a campfire talking, and they discover in the talking that they're all sort of on the same mission to figure out how to solve this terrible problem of the nothing. Okay, so one of these fairies is called Will-o'-the-Wisp. Another one is called Gluck-Gluck. And then there's there's Night-Hob. And then there's the Rock-Biter or the Rock-Chewer, and this giant mountain, basically. It's a man made out of a mountain. He eats rocks. And there's also one called Tiny. And so you've got these characters around the fire talking. And Will-o'-the-Wisp begins. He says, "In the east of our country, there was a lake, Lake Foaming Broth. One day, Lake Foaming Broth wasn't there anymore. It was gone." And Gluck-Gluck says, "You mean it dried up?" "No. Then there'd be a dried up lake. But there isn't. Where the lake used to be, there's nothing. Absolutely nothing." Rockbiter suggests, "A hole? No, not a hole. A hole, after all, is something. This is nothing at all." Nighthawk says, "What does this thing look like?" "It doesn't look like anything. It's like there's no word for it." Tiny chimes in, "Maybe when you look at a place, it's as if you were blind?" Will-o'-the-Wisp responds, "Exactly." All right, so trying to describe what this thing is. What does it mean that this nothing is attacking them and destroying things? And what is it, how do you describe it? There's no words for it. It's not part of your sense, experience at all. And then finally, Tiny suggests, is it like, it's not a hole, it's not a dried up lake, it's nothing. Is it kind of like if you were blind and you looked out and you just saw nothing? And Will-o'-the-Wisp is like, exactly, that's exactly what it is. Now, okay, so what I want to point out here, what I wonder if you notice, is that while a blind man looks and sees nothing, there is still something in that darkness, in that nothingness which the blind man sees. It's the blind man's awareness. It's his own awareness in that nothingness. It's something in it that knows there's nothing there. There's something in the nothing. There's a knower there. That's something which is aware of the nothingness. And I think this sets up the conversation well. I'm going to be using several sources to talk about mostly physics. There's some of this talk about nothingness, a lot of it really, that makes it so much more interesting when you layer in our most modern theories in terms of physics. And so I'm going to talk from a lecture called A Universe from Nothing by a physicist named Lawrence Krauss. This was a 2009 lecture. The same lecture, the Michio Kaku lecture that I used for the episode Nothing Matters with Michio Kaku. It's called The God Equation, The Quest for the Theory of Everything. That's from 2021. And then a lecture from Alan Watts, also it's called The Line of Least Resistance. It's a lecture he did on the I Ching. And then I'm going to pepper in some of the quotes from holy books like I like to do. So we're going to see the Enuma Elish, we're going to see the Bible, we're going to see some of these things. So that brings me to the beginning here. I want to call the first section Much Ado About Nothing. I don't know. Seems like a nice pun for the episode. Much Ado About Nothing. Okay, here we go. In the beginning, the Bible tells us, God created the heavens and the earth. But what do tell did he create them with? In that mysterious time before time, in that quantum tick before the ignition of the Big Bang, nothing yet existed for the cosmos to be made from. No energy, no matter. There was nothing. Only the abyss of our religious myths, right? The primordial chaos, the yawning gap, something like that, right? So what then? Did God create everything from nothing? It would seem so, but how could this be? Creation from nothing. Ex Nihilo. Seems to be a logical non-starter. How can you ever get something out of nothing? That is, of course, if nothing is, in fact, nothing. What if it's not? An examination of our myths supplies so many versions of the same idea. In one of our most ancient accounts, in the Rig Veda of India, we read, quote, "In the beginning, the golden embryo arose." Oh? Arose from what? From where? From nothing. Another hymn from the Rig Veda tells us, in the beginning, quote, "There was neither non-existence nor existence, neither the realm of space nor the sky. What stirred? Where? There was neither death nor immortality then, no distinguishing of night nor of day. That one breathed, windless, by its own impulse. There was impulse beneath. There was giving forth above. Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. What is this describing? What is it that existed before existence? What is it that stirred, that breathed without breath? Can it be nothing? Strange, isn't it? To imagine nothing as something which can be stirred, which can breathe and have impulses. Now, if you're thinking, this is just poetry, it doesn't matter that it constitutes a paradox because it doesn't refer to anything real, then let's look at this from a different perspective, shall we? From the perspective of modern science, we recognize creation as a real physical event. We call it the Big Bang. So our myths and our science begin from the same place, right? From the fact of an existent cosmos. and then work backwards to describe what must have occurred before there was anything to witness it. So where did the Big Bang come from? And according to the physicist Michio Kaku, quote, most likely it was a quantum fluctuation in nothing. Even a pure vacuum is frothing with matter and antimatter particles, continually jumping out of the vacuum and then collapsing back into the vacuum. This is how something came from nothing, unquote. Oh, man. Where did the Big Bang come from? Michio Kaku tells us a quantum fluctuation in nothing, the vacuum. But wait just a goddamn minute. Did he just say the cosmos emerged from fluctuations in nothing? Does science agree with myth on this? That creation came ex nihilo, from nothing? And like the Rig Veda describing nothing stirring, physics tells us it fluctuates. Incredible. So this is a paradox in science, in the real world, just as much as in myth and philosophy. Nothing somehow is, and yet is not nothing. So it seems to me we have two questions. How do you get something from nothing? And perhaps more importantly, what exactly is nothing? And that brings me to the next section here. I'm going to call this section something from nothing. All right. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're holding a dollar bill stretched out between both hands. Okay, there's no real dollar bill, just a pantomime. In reality, you were holding nothing. Now, pretend to tear that dollar bill in half and clench those imaginary pieces in your closed fists. Okay, now turn your fists over and slowly open them. What do you expect to see? Nothing, right? But what if instead you find yourself holding two shiny quarters in each palm? What if by tearing that imaginary dollar in two, you actually created something very, very real? What would that mean? What would that tell us about what nothing is? As wild as that may seem, it accords exactly with our best theories about the origin of the cosmos. When physicists study nothingness, the vacuum, they detect what they call virtual particles. The idea here is that even though the vacuum is perfectly empty, there remains an intractable and mysterious baseline of energy that cannot be removed. And this so-called vacuum energy actually transforms into matter, but only for the briefest of moments. So brief, they say, it falls below the smallest measurable duration, the quantum unit of time called Planck time. It happens so fast that it didn't happen at all. And this is how these particles are virtual. They're somehow real and yet not real. And a mysterious feature of these particles, in fact, all particles, is that they're always and only ever created in twos, in opposing pairs of particle and antiparticle, which cancel each other out if they ever come into contact with each other. So like the imaginary dollar bill, we start with nothing and we divide it into two very real things. And as it turns out, this is precisely what our best science says was the cause of the Big Bang. Like virtual particles arising spontaneously from quantum fluctuations in nothingness, Stephen Hawking described, quote, a foam of tiny universes continually bubbling up and disappearing back again into the vacuum. Now, this idea of annihilation is an interesting one that equal and opposite particles can literally cancel each other out, literally annihilate the existence of the other one. They seem to reverse creation, to undo each other. And particularly so when you learn that all the matter and energy created in the Big Bang was also created with this perfect symmetry. Equal parts matter and antimatter, equal parts positive energy and negative. And the same seems to be true, not just of matter and energy, but of everything governed by physics. The angular momentum of particles, what they call their spin, the presence of positive and negative charge, even the crests and troughs of the electromagnetic wave, all exactly balance, all canceling perfectly back to nothing. What does this mean? What is this trying to tell us? So that brings me to the next section, which I want to call the zero energy universe hypothesis. This goes back to Lawrence Krauss, who we talked about as one of the sources here. He's one of the main proponents of this particular theory. Let me just begin by talking about the law of conservation of energy. Now, you probably are familiar. It states that the total energy in a closed system like the universe remains constant. That energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be transformed from one form into another. Now, by this, we know that the amount of energy in the universe is the same today as it was at the Big Bang. But Lawrence Krauss tells us, quote, equal and opposite things cancel all the time because of the symmetries in nature. And on this basis, he and many leading physicists now believe that the amount of energy in the universe, wait for it, is exactly zero. Krauss says the total energy in the universe is precisely zero because the negative energy of gravity balances out the positive energy of matter. Only such a universe can begin from nothing. And that is remarkable because the laws of physics allow our universe to be created from nothing. So I want you to see the parallels here when he says if the net energy of the universe is exactly zero, what that means is the universe itself came from nothing. Imagine it. All the positive energy exactly cancels out the negative energy. All the upspin of particles exactly cancels out the downspin of others. Every particle exactly cancels out its antiparticle twin. Every peak of the wave function of the universe exactly cancels out its subsequent troughs. What do we have here? Is it something or is it nothing? What is this magic which exists between annihilations? This thing we call reality and being. All right, that brings me to the next section. I'm going to call this one, What is Nothing? Try to answer this question. And to do that, I want to first show how our ancient ancestors understood nothingness. So our creation myths all invariably begin with a mystery. This mystery is called God, the abyss, the deep. It's called infinite darkness and non-existence. But whether we call it God or Tao or chaos, what we are trying to do is to put a label on the mystery of nothingness. What we call nothingness is not nothing because it's absent or because it's impotent, but because it's unknowable and beyond experience, time, and space. Nothing may very well be something. It's just not the kind of something we can know. But that never stopped us from trying. And to work it out, we see in our myths images of a divine mystery expressed as a cosmic unity. The ancient Sumerians conceived of two primordial gods, opposite to one another, and yet in union. Tiamat, the goddess of chaos and of salt water, and Apsu, god of order and of fresh water. Before creation, they're envisioned as a single being, simultaneously creating and constituting all things. The Enuma Elish says, when the skies and the earth were not yet named, Apsu and Tiamat mixed their waters together. Then gods were born within them. You see, they must be separated from one another in order for the world to begin. Like their separation releases, so to speak, all the created things that were trapped within them. The unity must be divided so that something, anything, all things can come into being. Now, following the same pattern we see in ancient Zoroastrianism, the primordial unity called Ahura Mazda or Zirvan. They say in the beginning, quote, Ahura Mazda, which they call endless light, and Ahriman and the abyss, which is endlessly dark. Between them is a void. Right, so this is the description of this moment before creation. You have these two opposing spirits present within this primordial nothing. You can see that the nothing that's being described here is not exactly nothing, because in it you have the good spirit, Ahura Mazda, and you have the spirit of darkness, Ahriman. Now, the void between them is the same place described as the union of Apsu and Tiamat by the Sumerians. It is the void which can be filled by the cosmos, the place where creation occurs. Notice how again and again we are presented with a paradoxical primordial unity in the beginning, before the beginning. And how in each instance, this unity must be divided into equal and opposite halves before the world can be born. This is a symbolic, or it is symbolic rather, of the idea of creation by separation. Right? Things are created by being separated or divided out from the original cosmic unity, as if all things rest wrapped together, hidden within that unity. Now, a careful reader will easily spot these motifs in the Bible. Genesis says, God said, let there be light, and God divided the light from the darkness. It also says, God said, let there be a firmament, and God divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above. Right? You see, when God creates, there's always division happening. There's separation happening. Even in the creation of mankind, we see how God separated Eve from Adam. Right? The Bible says, in the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman. Right? In every case, the act of creation by separation creates not one new thing, but always two, equal and opposite. The creation of light separates day from night. You see that? The creation of the firmament separates heaven from earth. The creation of humanity separates woman from man. Do you see? Do you see how we begin from this mystery of nothingness, from the vacuum, and create pairs of opposites, just like the particles and antiparticles of our Big Bang? This is all telling us something. It's telling us that nature is actually, that nothing is actually something. And perhaps not just something, but all possible things all in one. How this everything all at once can also be nothing can be better understood, I think, with a few examples. I've used these before, but imagine all colors taken at once. You're not looking at red or green or yellow. You're looking at all the colors all at once. And when you do, all of these colors, they become no color at all, don't they? black in the case of paint, when you're mixing paint colors together, white in the case of light, right? In either case, the color is gone because they've been united. You see how that happens? Now, here's another example. How about we just take a geometrical shape like a circle, right? A circle is like a polygon, right? A polygon is just a shape with a certain number of sides, right? A circle is a polygon with an infinite number of sides. You can imagine if you take a triangle, you make it a square, you make it a hexagon and a pentagon, and you continue to go and add sides to it. Eventually, you're going to end up with a circle, right? A circle is a polygon with an infinite number of sides. Yet, with an infinite number of sides, a circle has no sides at all. See that? You see that, don't you? Lastly, think about experience as an example. Any kind of experience, but just think about experience. If you try to imagine all possible experiences happening all at once, when there's no distinction or separation between them, imagine you're taking them in all at once. That experience would become no particular experience, right? Because it's all experience, all at once. And in that way, it's no experience at all. An example of this that I've heard people say before is like, imagine taking every song that's ever been written and playing it all at once. If you're listening to every song ever written all at once with no separation, it would be like listening to static. There would be no music in it. You see the point? You see, everything all at once and nothing are synonyms, right? They're functionally equivalent. Everything, nothing. Isn't that interesting? If our myths have been right all along, could the nothingness which existed before the cosmos actually be something like all colors mixed together to seem to be no color at all? Could the vacuum actually be the infinite unfolding cosmos taken as a unity with no separation? And is this what we mean by God? That brings me to my conclusion. If you remember your Einstein, you will know that mass and energy are but different forms of the same thing. This is the secret of atomic energy, that things with mass, matter, can be converted into vast amounts of energy. So with the Big Bang, we have a release of tremendous energy, which could then transform into the matter we see in the stars and planets, etc. But according to the zero energy universe hypothesis, there is no energy. The net energy of the cosmos is zero. And if there's no energy, then there can't be any matter either, right? No stars, no planets, no people. And yet there are. So how? The answer that science suggests is strangely reminiscent of our deepest myths, as if they're telling the same story in different vocabularies. Where our myths tell us that God existed before creation, physics tells us the vacuum existed before the Big Bang. Where our myths describe God dividing itself from itself by becoming opposing pairs of deities, physics describes particle-antiparticle pairs leaping forth out of the vacuum. In both cases, we have something coming from nothing. And to make such a miracle happen, we see the same mechanism: division. Okay, now meditating on division, I begin to realize just how fundamental it is to the operations of nature. Strands of DNA divide, cells divide, even sexual reproduction is a kind of division. Every time a growing branch splits, every time a new language branches from its parent tongue, we see the process of division. And it stands to reason that if division was the mechanism of creation, we would see that pattern repeat in nature. It's amazing. Okay, with that said, I've made my point, but I want to suggest one more thing. And this is purely for fun. Remember when we spoke about annihilation? When we described how all the energy in the cosmos exactly cancels out, and similarly how particle-antiparticle pairs actually undo each other by coming into contact. I mean, the whole mystery surrounding cosmology is why they haven't canceled out already. How is it that there's something rather than nothing? How is it that opposing charges and opposing motion and opposing fields of energy exist at all, rather than annihilating immediately? Then I remember my Einstein, how time is relative, how motion and gravity affect how quickly time passes. I imagine the indescribable gravity and motion created by the Big Bang explosion and wonder what effect it must have had on time. What if this explains why something exists rather than nothing? Why the inevitable annihilation of the cosmos has not yet occurred? What if the fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a millisecond after the Big Bang, that rare moment of magic when energy and matter escape from equilibrium and manifest in the world, what if we're still living in that millisecond? What if the force of the Big Bang dilated time so dramatically that the 14 billion years of our cosmic life have passed in the Planck time between creation and annihilation? Is your mind sufficiently blown? Good. Then my work is done, and I can leave you with a few quotes to bring us home. First one by Alan Watts, who said, "Real nothingness is not darkness. It's not like being buried alive forever. It's not like rest. What is it? Nobody can imagine. At that point where the imagination completely runs out, there we've hit the thing, the fundamental mystical reality." And lastly, a quote from the Sufi mystic Gulshan Raz from the 1300s, who said, "Every being who is separated from himself hears outside of him this voice and this echo: I am God."
Well, there you have it.